Alrighty. Today we walk through chapter 18 of Shemot. That's, of course, Exodus to the uninitiated, where we find that this event is out of chronological order. This reality arises in verse 5, which tells us that Yitro, that's the guy we call Jethro, came to the wilderness where Moshe, that's the guy we call Moses, was camping at the mountain of God. We know that this event is out of chronological order because it is not until chapter 19 that the children of Israel leave Rephidim and travel to Sinai, which is called the mountain of God. By the way, did you guys know that the Mechilta and the Babylonian Talmud in Zevachim 116a point out that the Bible uses 7 different names in referring to the father-in-law of Moshe? Yeah, you have Ruel, Yeter, Yitro, which we call Jethro, Horav, Hever, Cani, and Putiel. I'm not terribly sure of Hovav and Putiel, but the sages think so. So now we begin with Shemot, or Exodus, chapter 18, verse 1, and this will be my translation of this chapter. Verse 1 says, And Yitro, Cohen, that's the priest of Midian. Midian, you hear Midian, right? Midian is the English word, but Midian is how you say it for real. So it says, Yitro, Cohen of Midian, father-in-law of Moshe, heard everything that God had done to Moshe and to his people, Israel. For Yahweh caused Israel to go out from Mitzrayim. Hasidic said the fact that the narrative begins with the name Elohim, which means God, and continues to use this name and not the tetragrammaton. I know I've been calling it tetragrammation my whole life, but I just realized there's no A after that T. So it's tetragrammaton. That's the Yod He Vav He, the word Yahweh. They call it the tetragrammaton. Okay, so he says the fact that the word Yahweh is not used except for verses that seek to emphasize specifically the name of Israel's God proves that there is no substance in the conjecture of a number of scholars that it was from the Cani or the Kenites that the Israelites learned to know the name of Yahweh. Even though the Bible itself says that God told Moshe his name was Yahweh, some scholars have come to believe that the Jews learned this name from the Kenites. So, that idea. The argument, though, of these scholars is based in some part on their belief that there were several different documents blended together which make up the Torah. You know, they say there's a J document and a EIO document. There's all these different documents. They say they're all blended together because one uses Elohim, one uses Yahweh, one uses Hashem, whatever it is. And they say this was all different writers and they're all blended together, right? And so that one thing leads to another. And now they think the Kenites came up with the name. Well, they believe that they were blended together and that makes up the Torah. Some scholars have come to think that because the tetragrammation, the Yod He Vav He, or the Hebrew name of God, which is Yahweh, because that was used in some places while Elohim and others, this, they say, shows the blending of several different versions of the Torah together. Cassuto has already debunked this idiotic point of view and is now crushing the idea that the Kenites, rather than God, taught Moshe his name. He's totally debunked both of these arguments. You need to look at his work if you want to see how he did that, but he utterly destroys these arguments. All right, so verse 2. And Yithro, father-in-law of Moshe, took Zipporah, wife of Moshe, after he sent her away. So Moshe sent away his wife after he sent her away. Now, there is a tradition based on an epic poem which was lost to mankind shortly after Moshe wrote the Torah, if in fact it ever existed, which taught that Moshe sent his pregnant wife and their young son to her father's house while he carried out the task God set before him. Of course, it is believed in this epic poem that Moshe had every intention of returning for his wife once the time was right. But think about this. In ancient Eastern culture, to send a wife away was to divorce her. The Yehudim have never wanted to go down this road with Moshe because that would mean that not only did he divorce his wife, but he divorced her while she was pregnant with their second child. The use of the words sent her away do not have to mean divorce, but the possibility is certainly there. It would set the visitation of Yithro, his father-in-law, in a very different light, wouldn't it? Did he come back with the wife of Moshe and his children because she was ready to reconcile? This private meeting between he and Moshe did in fact end with a peace offering that included the entire family of Moshe and the elders of Israel, adding to this intrigue, this mystery. Remember, Moshe committed murder without cause or reason and then fled like a coward. He was certainly not articulate, nor a perfect, flawless saint. He was a man. I'm saying he could have been really hard to live with. Just, thinking out loud here. The great things that happened at the hand and rod of Moshe happened in spite of his flaws and in spite of his insignificance in the grand scheme of things, making it obvious, or should have made it obvious, that God was the reason and the power behind it all, not Moshe. Verse 3. And her two sons, because he said Yithro came with the wife of Moshe. In verse 3 it says, and her two sons, of whom the name of one, for he, speaking of Moshe, said, I was a stranger, a ger, as Gershom here, ger, in a foreign land. The daughters of Yithro first called Moshe an Egyptian. I mean, after all, he was born and raised there in Egypt. However, he was a Yehudi, he was a Jew in the land of the Egyptians. Thus, he was a stranger, a ger, in a foreign land. Verse 4. And the name of one, Eliezer. So I changed the translation a little bit to, and the name of the other one was Eliezer, the other son. For the God of my father helped me and delivered me from the sword of Paro. It can be assumed here that the second son of Moshe was born shortly after he returned to Mitzrayim. And that means that Moshe gave the name of his son before he returned, before he left the mountain, or he left Midian. Okay, 5, because before someone starts thinking I'm talking about the mountain of God. Verse 5, and Yithro, the father-in-law of Moshe, came with his, speaking of Moshe's sons and wife, to the wilderness, since he, speaking of Moshe, camped there at the mountain of God. So we have a problem here because, again, they're not at the mountain of God at this point in time. So chronologically, we got a problem, right? Cassuto said the arrangement of the narratives in the Torah is certainly not in the sequence required by the Greek way of thinking to which we are accustomed today. Chronological order, for instance, which takes precedence in the techniques of Greek and modern literature, is not of such importance in the ancient Eastern writings. One of the methods is to arrange the subject matter on the basis of association, both thematic and verbal association. In general, the association of subjects and even verbal associations was a more important factor in the arrangement of linking of sections or hand linking of sections than the chronicle sequence. Hope you understood that. Castudo gave the following example here from this text. And Amalek came and fought Israel. So the parallel, the poetic parallel to that is, and Yithro came, and they asked after each other's welfare or each other's peace. It's the antithesis. Amalek came and fought, Yithro came and asked about peace, asked after his peace. So it's a parallelism, but it's an antithesis. Thus, the chapter was moved here out of chronological order to be a poetic parallelism. Verse 6. And he said to Moshe, I, your father-in-law, Yithro, come to you and your wife and 2 sons with her. So let's look at this. He said to Moshe. The Melchita, Sadia, and Rashi all agree that the message was given through a messenger. But Nachmanides felt that the message was communicated via a written note. Even Ezra felt it could have been both. Cassutto said that Yithro would have told the guards at the gate to give this message to Moshe. But I'm not so sure I can agree with this assessment in that there would have been no fence, let alone a gate. However, Moshe was inundated with long lines of people, as we will soon see, waiting to speak to him. Thus, Yithro must have sent word through someone or something or both. Verse 7. And Moshe went out to meet his father-in-law. Now, this is going to be a key. He went out to meet his father-in-law. What are you not allowed to do on the Shabbat back in these days? You're not allowed to go out. And given that this is out of chronological order, they have in fact already received the law. Anyway, so Moshe went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and he kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being. He asked about their peace, literally, their shalom, and entered the tent. The tent. You remember, the temple, the tabernacle, all started out being called the tent, or I shouldn't say started out being called. From the beginning, they were called the tent. Okay, so let's talk about this bowed down and kissed him. The Hebrew and even the Aramaic translation done by Onkelos do not make it clear concerning who bowed to whom or who kissed whom first. Now, this became a huge issue among the sages. Even Ezra translated it as they both bowed to each other. The Samaritan Bible and its Targums say that Yithro bowed to Moshe, because Moshe is more important, right? So this may be a good time to explain something about the Hebrew language and why punctuation is not needed. Okay? You think about it. If you put the comma in one place, you're speaking about Moshe and he bowed, comma, and then you talk about Yithro. Or you talk about Moshe, comma, and it says, and he bowed, Yithro. So then Yithro's the one that bowed. So you got a problem here, right? Because depending on where you put that comma, it's going to that in our world is going to make the difference as to who bowed to whom and who kissed whom first, or one or the other, perhaps. But see, in Hebrew, you don't need the comma. Why? Because what they're saying here is they both bowed to each other and they both kissed each other. So it makes no difference. Thus, even Ezra was correct, though I do not think he knew why. The tent. Cassutto said that the tent was the tent of Moshe, though it is possible that they met in the tent of meetings, which was erected at this point in time. Because remember, it's out of chronological order. If Yithro arrived on the Shabbat, and I alluded to this earlier, it would have been Moshe's tent. but he wouldn't have left his tent. So we're guessing this isn't the Shabbat. Why? Because the Shabbat, the law had been given by this time. So we know that they were not allowed to leave their tent on Shabbat. Right? So if it was during the week, Moshe would have been in the tent. He would have been in the tabernacle, that tent, not his personal tent. Do you see what's happening? So Moshe left the tabernacle while there's a big old long line of people waiting for him. I think everybody would have understood. Plus, he's the judge. He has the right to do what he wants to do, right? Verse 8. And Moshe recounted to his father-in-law all that Yahweh did to Paro and to Mitzrayim on behalf of Israel, all the hardships they found in the way, and how Yahweh delivered them. The pseudo translated it, and Moshe recounted to his father-in-law all the details. To harmonize the reason why Moshe would tell Yethro everything that happened, given that verse 1 tells us that Yethro had already heard all. Remember that from verse 1? He'd already heard it all. Personally, I'm not surprised that an 80-year-old man would recount something to someone else that they already know. Ladies, would any of you be surprised if your husband's told you the same story over and over? Hey, I'm just saying. Verse 9. Yethro rejoiced on all the good which Yahweh did to Israel, whom he delivered from, it says literally, the hand of Mitzrayim, from the hand of Egypt. That's an idiom, from the strength of Mitzrayim is what it really means in English. So, and Yethro said, Blessed be Yahweh, who delivered you from the strength of Mitzrayim and from the strength of Paro, who has delivered the people from the strength of Mitzrayim. Kasuto said this, and it's very important. The threefold use of the expression delivered, because I don't know if you noticed it, but delivered was said 3 times. He said it is intended for emphasis. Emphasis. It's not there. The use of the word 3 times in the last 2 verses was not there for us to find 3 bullet-pointed, separate but equally important points about God's deliverance. They are there to add emphasis to the fact that God delivered. That's why the Jews do that. It's not built like Greek. Greek builds things so that there's different points. And that's what we call bullet points now, because you've got the little bullet things in Word or whatever, wherever that came from. But you get, the Jews didn't do that. They didn't think in Greek, they didn't write in Greek, they thought in Hebrew, and they wrote in Hebrew, and the Hebrew repeats things for emphasis. All right, verse 11. Now, right now, never before, not down the road, but right now. This is Yethro talking, by the way. Now I know that Yahweh is greatest from all the gods, for in their arrogant boasts he was above them all. Now, right now, after everything, finally, now I know. Rashbam translated it, now I am aware that idols have no power to avenge the wrong done to their worshippers. The pseudo translated it, now I realize. Listen, Yethro was the priest of Midian. He was not a Jewish priest from one of the 12 tribes. If he were, the children of Moshe would have been circumcised on the 8th day by their grandfather, the priest of Midian. Instead, we find that Moshe's wife circumcised their children in chapter 4, verse 5, and was very, very unhappy about it. She took the foreskin, threw it at Moshe, and called him a bloody man. She was not happy about this. Doesn't sound very Jewish, does it? Yethro was a Canaanite. A Canaanite, he was a Canaanite. He was a priest living in a place called Midian. And though he sacrificed to the God of Moshe, There is no evidence that he ever converted to Yehudi or to Judaism. Let's look at in their arrogant boast, he was above them. Because the text is a little confusing if you don't speak Hebrew, and most of the sages did not. The pseudo translated it, excelling them in the very things to which they laid claim. I'm good with that. Verse 12, and Yithro, father-in-law of Moshe, took a burnt sacrifice to Elohim. And Aharon and the Zipnei came, remember those are the elders, came to eat bread with the father-in-law of Moshe, two faces Elohim, in the presence of Elohim. What do you mean Elohim? There's a problem here. You may not know it, but there's a problem here. Pseudo said that the use of the word Elohim instead of Yahweh shows us that although Yithro recognized the supremacy of Yahweh, now I know, so he recognized the supremacy of Yahweh over the other deities, he did not entirely accept the religion of Israel. Pseudo was absolutely right here, and there's a reason why he's right, and a reason why this is a problem for everybody else, particularly the sages. The sages said that Yithro was a proselyte, and they say that Moshe sent him back to his hometown so he could proselytize everybody else. Isn't that very Christian? The second you get saved, you got to go out and tell everybody else about. The Jews didn't do that. They have never done that. Problem here, right? The sages are making this guy out to be a proselyte to Judaism, saying that there is no place in the Torah where Elohim, Eloheha, Shaddai, or Zevuot is used in connection with a sacrifice, except, of course, for one exception, this very verse. In other words, an exception to the rule has to be made here to make Yithro a proselyte. The pseudo's explanation, of course, is far more reasonable. What am I telling you? I'm telling you that every verse in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah in particular, speaking about a sacrifice, always uses the name Yahweh, except this one time, because he's the only non-Jew to sacrifice to Yahweh, is basically. So they make an exception to the rule rather than going with the rule, because the rule then makes Yithro basically a Gentile pagan priest that goes back to his Gentile pagan life. And they don't like that, so they make an exception to their rule. Let's look at the words to eat bread in this verse. Pseudo said, to eat bread was to partake of the holy meal and to eat of the flesh of the peace offerings. With Moses' father-in-law before God, to wit, at the entrance of the tent of meetings. Now he says that they're at the tent of meetings for the sacrifice, which had already been erected before Yithro's visit. So he's alluding to the fact that it's out of chronological order. So again, chronological order is a Western idea, not a biblical idea. This chapter is out of chronological order on purpose. It was not a mistake. Pseudo also pointed out that from where Yithro took the animals for sacrifice was not given in the story because it was not important to the story. Thus, when we become hung up on these details and begin to believe that we cannot move on without the answer, we don't understand one simple rule of Hebrew grammar. Here's the rule. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, so it may not be an actual rule of Hebrew grammar, but it is good advice. If the text doesn't speak of it, it is not important. It is not important. To make it important is to create a new religion. Let it go. Move on. God knew what he was doing. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next section of our chapter. Pseudo says that it is possible that the idea Yithro gave to Moshe of placing other rulers to help carry the burden may have come from Canaanite culture. It is nothing more than conjecture, and it misses the greater lesson we just learned. If it isn't there, it isn't important. Moshe recounts this story in Deuteronomy, by the way, chapter 1. But Yithro is not mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 1. And there Moshe, there in Deuteronomy, Moshe says he spoke to the people, and they responded. Ooh, we got a problem. All right. Casuto points out that the emphasis was different in the two stories. This is why the two stories don't match. The information in chapter 18 is to point out Yithro's initiative and advice, where in Deuteronomy, the emphasis is on how it was implemented. That is to say, here we find out that it was Yithro's idea to set up rulers. And in Deuteronomy, we see that Moshe took Yithro's advice to the people who agreed to follow it. So there's no mistake here. There's no problem here. There's no error here. This is the way Jews write things. This is the way they do things. And do you remember the argument about different writers using different names of God? Casuto said throughout the paragraph, the Bible uses the name Elohim, not the Tetragrammaton. Remember, not Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. For this is the usual procedure. Listen close. Now we're going to explain it. We're going to bring it all full circle. Using Elohim instead of God's name, he says, this is the usual procedure in conversations with non-Israelites. Yithro was a non-Israelite. So long as there is no intention to make an expression distinction and express distinction rather between the God of Israel and the heathen deities. The reason why it says Elohim is because they don't feel the need to make a distinction between the real God and the fake gods. And they do this when a Gentile is involved. Yithro was a Gentile. He was a non-Jew. He was not Israeli. He was not of the 12 tribes. He was an outsider. And so because of that, they use Elohim. So no, document J is not being blended with document D. You see where we're going with this? That document stuff comes from people who don't speak Hebrew and don't know what they're talking about. So now let's move on to verse 13, which says, this is again my translation, and it came to pass the next day, and Moshe set to judge the people, and the people stood on Moshe from morning until evening. Why would they stand on Moshe? That had to hurt. No, to stand on Moshe was to press on him. You know, they were just coming at him and coming at him and coming at him, and the questions were hard. And I mean, they were wearing it out. So my translation is, he sat to judge the people, and the people pressed Moshe from morning until evening. So it's all day long. The next day, even Ezra believed that the next day was the day after the arrival of Yithro, which it was, but Rashi felt that this section was out of chronological, just this section was out of chronological order, suggesting that the entire event took place after the tablets were given at Sinai. As stated earlier, the entire chapter is out of order. Rashi is right in that this event did not take place until Sinai. However, this chapter is where it belongs because it follows the subject matter, which in this case is associated with Yithro's encounter with Moshe, to poetically contrast against the hardships from the point of leaving Egypt to the end of the war with Amalek. Now peace has come, and Moshe can be reunited with his family, find peace in his new role as judge over Israel, and a sacrifice for that peace can be made by Moshe's entire family and all the elders, thus bringing the hard times to an end and making ready the next big adventure for the Yehudim, for the Jews. That's the reason why it's out of order. In the verse, remember, it said from morning until evening. Some argued that this term is exaggerated since it is impossible for someone to stand in line this long. Well, Okay, but I've seen people stand in line that long for an iPhone. Yeah, I'm just saying. Actually, the text is not telling us that person stood in line from morning to evening. They just stood there. All from the time the sun come up to the time, they just stood there and didn't move. No, it's telling us that there was a line from morning till evening. Moshe would talk to this one, answer the question, he'd leave. The next one would come, talk to him, answer the question, they'd leave. The next one, you get it? It's a moving line. People are not standing there all day, but there was a line there all day. All right, verse 14. And the father-in-law of Moshe saw all that he did. Speaking of Moshe, his father-in-law saw all that Moshe did to the people, and he said, "What is this word?" What? Okay, they use the word davar, which actually means word in Hebrew, to mean what we think of as thing. So he's saying, what is this thing which you do to the people? Why do you two self-you? Why do you two self-you? Why do you sit alone? That's what to self-you, alone. Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand on you. All the people press you from morning until evening. And Moshe said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. For when a matter comes to them, they come to me, and I judge between man and between friend. So I judge between them, is what it means. And I make known to them, that's not really in the text, but I have to them there for a reason, the statutes of God and his instructions. So let's talk about to them, since it's really not part of it. Onkelos added to them because he was afraid that some would think that Moshe was getting his information for each individual directly from God. Like, they come to him and say, I think he's a boo-boo head. And the other guy says, no, I'm not. So now he's got to go to God and say, which one's the boo-boo head? And then he comes back and says, you're the boo-boo head, he's not. Right? They're worried. Onkelos was worried that type of thing would be thought of by the reader, because in his world, that's what the pagan prophets did. You brought them their thing, they went to their little idol, they did, oh, meeny, and then they came back and said, thus is this and thus is that, right? And so he's afraid that people are going to read this and think that Moshe is doing the same thing. No. Moshe was giving his interpretation of the Torah, which he did, in fact, receive from God. Anyway, verse 17. And the father-in-law of Moshe said to him, not good, this word that you do. So what does that mean? He said, it is not good, this thing that you do. Verse 18. Will wear out for both you also this people which is with you, because this word heavy for you are not able to do it, to self you. Okay, let's put that in a little clearer English. This is too wearisome for both you and also this people which is with you, because this thing is too heavy, for you are not able to do it alone. That's what is really being said here. Verse 19, hear now my voice. This is Yethro talking to Moshe. Hear now my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. You are to the people in front of God, and you bring the thing to God. So first off, we got the word wearisome, that thing that didn't make any sense. Shall wear you out for both you all and also this people. So this is too wearisome. So wearisome. Rashi translated it, its weight is greater than your strength. Pretty straightforward, good way to look at it. The part where it says, I will give you counsel and God will be with you. Rashi also translated that to say, I will give you advice, so consult God whether it should be adopted. That's real good there as well. You are to the people in front of God. Rashi said, be the intermediary between God and his people. Nachmanides said, be their intercessor. I'm in agreement with both of those. 20. And you have taught them the statutes and the instructions, and you have made known to them the way in which they should go and the deeds that they should do. So let's look at you have taught them. Nachmanides said that Moshe was the only one who can instruct the people in God's law, which, if you think about it, throws every Jew that has ever lived since the death of Moshe under the spiritual bus. I mean, think about it. It's too bad for us. No Moshe to teach us. So Nachmanides was a little out there on that one. I think I know what he meant by it, but what he said was a little out there. Verse 21. Seek. It's really more like see. See from all the people. But I put seek so it makes more sense. But it is from the idea of looking and seeing something. Seek from all the people able men who reverence God, faithful men hating unjust gain, and place them sare, that means rulers. Place them sare over the thousands, sare over the hundreds, sare over the fifties, and sare over the tens. Or, if you will, place them rulers over the thousands, rulers over the hundreds, rulers over the fifties, and rulers over the tens. So let's look at the seek. Remember the looking, the seeing thing? Some translators change seek to choose. The pseudo says it is because in the Ugaritic uh, and Hebrew, seeking is used in the context of choosing. Then let's look at hating unjust gain. Rashbam called unjust gains bribes. Onkelos and the Mechilta say that the biblical text literally means that hate money. Choose those that hate money. They thus believe it meant that Moshe should pick men who would be judges that would not accept bribes because they hated money. The pseudo said that this meant that these would be men who not only hated bribery but would not accept them. You know, just because we call them special interest groups or lobbyists does not mean that these are not bribes. Thus, politicians in our world would never be our leaders in one nation under the real God. None of them. The numbers thousands, hundreds, and fifties and tens were not to be taken, as Casuto put it, with mathematical exactitude, but as various ranks of rulers and one senior to the other. I've got to say I agree with him because there weren't enough people at the time to set up those rulers. You didn't have enough to didn't add up. Verse 22. And let them judge, those rulers, judge the people in all occasions. And it will come to pass, all the great words, all the great things, they will bring to you. And all the small words, the small things, those rulers will judge. And that will lighten your burden. That will ease from upon you. That will lighten your burden, is what that means. And they will bear it with you. If you do this word, if you do this thing, and God commands you, then you will be able to stand. And indeed, all this people will go to their place in shalom, peace. So the part where it says, and God commands you, then you will be able to stand. Rashi, utilizing the Mechita, basically said, if you, Moshe, ask of God and he orders it, you will be able to stand. The pseudo translated it, if your God will sanction this thing and will command you to implement it, you will stand. In verse 24, and Moshe obeyed the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. 24 is the general statement. Moshe obeyed and did everything, right? That's a general statement, but now the details will come in verses 25 and 26. This is common in Hebrew. And Moshe chose able men. So it says he did everything he was told. Well, he was told to choose able men. So now it's the detail. Moshe chose able men from out of Israel and placed them chief over the people. Sare placed them at the, he uses the word Rosh, at the head, so it's chief over the people. Sare, that's rulers over the thousands, rulers over the hundreds, rulers over the fifties, and rulers over the tens. Then the words, and Moshe chose. This is important. Remember the seeking thing, the seeing thing, and they say that in the Ugaritic, in the Hebrew, the choosing was from the word of seeing. Well, here in this text, it actually says that Moshe chose. He was told to see, and here it says he chose. Thus, Casuto said earlier, seek or see equals chose. You have the proof right there in the text. Verse 26. And they judged the people in all occasions, and the hard words, the hard things they brought to Moshe, and all the small words, the small things, the rulers, judged them. And Moshe sent his father-in-law away, and he, Yitro, speaking of the father-in-law, went to his own land. He went back to Midian. So this concludes our study of chapter 18. Shalom, shalom, y'all.